Hi, so in this video we're going to be talking about the first couple steps of pathogenesis. Remember, pathogenesis is the development of a disease. So the first couple steps that we're going to be talking about are exposure and adhesion. So the pathogens actually getting into the body and then their method of sticking around inside of the body. So, modes of transmission, how do you actually get exposed to pathogens? We have contact transmission, vehicle transmission, and vector transmission. Within contact transmission, we have direct contact and we have indirect contact. Direct contact is when you make direct contact with an organism that has the disease. So, an animal or a person who is actually infected, you actually touch them and then you are going to get infected with them. In indirect contact, we have transmission through fomites, which are inanimate objects, and droplet transmission. So droplet transmission is actually considered a form of contact transmission. So droplets are these water droplets that are formed when you cough or sneeze or even sometimes just talk. And they're relatively large and heavy. They don't travel that far. They don't stick around in the air for very long, but if you get those droplets either directly onto a person by coughing or sneezing right in their face, or if you cough and sneeze onto your hands or another surface, and then somebody else touches your hands, like handshakes, or touches a surface that you have touched, then they can get infected. So a fomite is just any inanimate object that can transmit a pathogen. So this can include a doorknob, it can include a cell phone, it can include a rusty nail like we're seeing here. So any inanimate object that can transmit a pathogen is a fomite. Then we have vehicle transmission. This is where something non-living is going to actually carry the pathogen around. One form of vehicle transmission is going to be airborne transmission. Note this is different from contact transmission with droplets. In airborne transmission, the pathogen is able to float around in the air for long periods of time. For example, with measles, even after someone with measles has left the room, the infectious measles particles can actually float around in the air for hours afterwards and still get people sick. So they're floating around either by themselves or on little dust particles, and just being in the same room with someone without necessarily touching them or having them cough on you is enough to get sick. In waterborne transmission, you are going to ingest contaminated water. In foodborne transmission, you are going to ingest contaminated food. So we talked about both of these sorts of transmission when we were talking about different parasites. Then we have vector transmission. In vector transmission, a living creature is going to transmit the pathogen around. So this can be either as a biological vector or as a mechanical vector. So a biological vector is going to transmit, for example, when it takes a blood meal. So when a flea or a tick or a mosquito goes and actually drinks your blood, it can transmit the pathogen that way. A mechanical vector just sort of carries the pathogen around on it. For example, if a fly goes and walks on dog poop and then it walks on your sandwich and it transmits bacteria that way, that is considered a mechanical vector. So, how do the pathogens actually get into your body? We call the ways for pathogens to get into your body portals of entry. One of the major portals of entry are going to be your mucous membranes. For example, this is why you are told not to touch your face, because your face has your conjunctiva in your eye, your nasal passages have mucous membranes, your mouth has mucous membranes. All of these are potential routes of transmission, portals of entry for the pathogens to get into your body. You also have mucous membranes in your digestive tract and in your urogenital tract. So, sexual transmission, for example, is going to be through um, your mucous membranes in your urogenital tract. And then your skin is going to be mostly a pretty strong barrier against infection. However, there are some sorts of pathogens that are able to actually break through the keratin that makes that strong barrier of protection against pathogens. Then we have the parenteral route. So the parenteral route is essentially any time the skin gets broken, either through a cut or through a puncture from, for example, a needle, that is going to be the parenteral route. And then there's the placenta. And the placenta is going to usually be a pretty strong barrier against infection, but there are certain types of pathogens like toxoplasmosis, which is able to actually get through that placental barrier and directly transmit from mother to fetus. Then the pathogen also has to have a way out of the body. So we call these portals of exit. So, for example, coughing and sneezing, again, really important that you are covering your mouth when you cough or sneeze. Right now, everyone is recommended to wear some sort of cloth mask, and that is going to, again, help prevent droplets from being spread by coughing and sneezing. Then we have blood, either through a blood transfusion or through exposure to a wound, insect bites, open sores, urine, feces. We've talked about a lot about the oral fecal route of transmission, and then sexual transmission. So a lot of pathogens have discovered that if they hang around on an animal's genitals, that animal will eventually mush those genitals up against the genitals of another animal, and then that will give it a path to move from host to host. It's worked pretty well for them for millions of years. Then we have adhesion. So adhesion is when pathogens are going to stick to your cells. So just because you get exposed to a pathogen doesn't necessarily mean you get sick. They need some way of sticking to your cells, otherwise your body is going to just wash them out. One way that cells can adhere or stick around is with these proteins called adhesins. So these are proteins that attach to receptors on your cells. Note the receptors on your cells are not there for bacteria or viruses to attach to. They're there to do important things in your body, like regulate your immune system or your blood pressure, but by their nature, they have to be kind of sticky. So pathogens have figured out ways of sticking to these receptors and then attaching to your cells using these adhesins, which are often going to be found on the ends of fibria or pili. They can also be found inside the capsule or actually attached to the ends of flagella. Another way that a pathogen can stick around for a long period of time is by forming a biofilm. Remember, biofilms are those microenvironments that are formed when the glycocalyx, the capsules or slime layers of many bacterial or microorganismal cells come together, and that provides a lot of benefits for the organisms. So it can help prevent phagocytosis, it can help prevent dehydration, it can help it attach to surfaces inside and outside of the body, it can help resist chemical and physical removal, and remember, bacteria inside of a biofilm can be up to 1,000 times more resistant to antibiotics than individual bacterial cells. And this is often a source of these HAIs, healthcare acquired infections. Okay, so plaque, that's an example of a biofilm. And here you can see a biofilm forming on a catheter relatively shortly after insertion.